describes itself one way and behaves in quite a different way. And the divisiveness and ugliness and the horror of mainstream media companies employing people who tweet things like, "Kill all white men," "I bathe in male tears," "Masculinity is so fragile." People just don't want to be around that kind of thing. And it comes almost exclusively from the progressive left, just like violence does. And it has alienated an entire generation of women who realize that the great victories that we should be proud of, that feminism fought for in previous generations, have all been won. And there is no place left for an organized feminist movement in society because, thankfully, we won.
You've been quoted in the media talking about Muslims and the Muslim religion. That's a topic of interest to some of my Senate colleagues here. In your view, what is the problem? What problem have you been identifying, and what solution do you recommend?
Well, I take a view that will come to some people, maybe in Australia and certainly in Europe, as shocking and as offensive, probably, hopefully. But it is one shared by millions of American voters, almost certainly millions of Australians, and the President of the United States. So it's not that marginal. As a gay man, I don't feel comfortable in societies with large numbers of Muslims who refuse to integrate. You had that story in 2016 of your Grand Mufti who gave a speech praising the integration of Muslims in Arabic, because he'd been here almost 20 years and still didn't speak English. And these things are now, slightly, these are a little beyond satire. They're a reality. I mean, Britain, where I'm from, we send more fighters to ISIS than any country except Belgium, which has its own jihadi problem. Now, I live 2 hours from Orlando, where the Pulse nightclub massacre happened in the United States. This is not some fringe 4% lunatic. This is mainstream Muslim culture which routinely oppresses women and murders homosexuals. Hundreds of millions of people live in countries where I would be killed for my sexuality. 11 of them, I think, all Muslim. I'm not comfortable with the horrifyingly regressive social attitudes of Muslims in the West. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can ask any of the pollsters from left-wing organizations like Channel 4 in the UK who discovered appalling things about British Muslims, second and third generation Muslims, their attitudes to gay rights, to marriage, polygamy, Sharia law. One in 4 Muslims in Britain wants Sharia law, in which a woman's testimony is worth half that of a man's in certain circumstances. This stuff is not acceptable in Western liberal democracies, and it shouldn't be allowed. And if our new friends from the Middle East refuse to integrate, they shouldn't stay here. I don't find that to be a particularly controversial position, but apparently it is.
One final question from me. You got, apparently, I'm told, banned from Twitter, and I'm wondering, tell us why and what you think of that.
Well, I am probably the most misreported on person in the world, with the exception maybe of the American president. You will probably have heard that I support pedophilia when actually I'm a victim of it, and was talking loosely, admittedly loosely, about my own experiences. You will have heard that I'm a neo-Nazi and a white supremacist. I'm a really bad one. I just married a black guy. You will have heard that I got banned from Twitter for inciting a racist hate campaign against the actress Leslie Jones. What you won't hear is that I wrote a review of Ghostbusters defending her and saying what a shame it was that she was expected to play a sort of minstrel role in the movie, and what a pity it was that black women were forced into these stereotypical roles in movies, and wouldn't it be nice if she could have just been in the movie and been funny rather than had to do the sort of sassy black woman routine. Now, other people took that review and said mean things on Twitter, and I was blamed for it, but didn't do anything. Now, I make no apologies for making comments about her appearance. I think as a commentator, I should be allowed to comment on the appearance of other people in public life. I would ask those people who are incensed and outraged by my words, by my jokes, by my observations, by my repeating of readily establishable fact, what they plan to do if they're so angry about my words in response to the violence from the left last night in Melbourne. People throwing rocks at the police, beating each other up, beating up journalists. I see a lot of people complaining about my jokes about Aboriginal art, my jokes about feminists, my jokes about Muslim commentators on Channel 10. I don't see a lot of outrage from the left about these feral protesters attacking law enforcement, attacking journalists, and attacking innocent law-abiding citizens. So forgive me if I don't have too much patience for people virtue signaling and clutching their pearls about jokes I make that are supposedly so offensive when they are silent on the subject of rocks being thrown in the faces of police officers?
Well, because of the acoustics in here, if you have a question for Milo,
maybe come up here or something.
Yeah, if you could actually call it out, and I will repeat it for everybody to hear. So, oh, okay, we found the microphone.
Any questions? John?
Is it?
G'day. When you were interviewed by Kate Hopkins recently,
Kate Hopkins.
Yeah, she said that she would like to have a gay son, and you kind of got offended and pushed back on that. So why were you offended by that?
I wasn't offended. I don't really have that bit of my brain, but I thought it was a pity she said so. I think she's just trying to be funny. I think she likes the idea of having someone to go shopping with. I don't like it when people in media, either to be funny or to communicate their own left-wing virtue, say that they would prefer to have gay children. Let me tell you, irrespective of homophobia, it is not a life you would choose for anybody. That's not because I'm self-loathing or have some kind of internalized hatred about my sexuality, but everybody who is gay must come to terms at some point with the fact that they can't create a child with the person they love in the ordinary way. Now, they may not articulate it precisely like that, but that's something that gay people have to come to terms with. It is an inescapable biological reality of existence. I find it weird and sad and uncomfortable and unpleasant that anybody would say they wish that on their own children.
There's a gentleman in the middle there. Yeah.
Hi Milo, my name's Jason Ross.
Use the microphone if you would, so others can
I'll
hear.
try and use it if it does anything.
We can hear it, yeah.
Oh, that's called working? Okay. Hi Milo, my name's Jason Ross. I'm with Pauline Hanson's One Nation. She's the lady in the front row to your far right, sitting there.
She's on the far right.
Far right. She is the champion of free speech in Australia. I just want to say thank you on behalf of those of us who have our freedom of speech restricted in this country.
Thank you.
I just want your advice on two quick things. One is, you have come to the country that has the least democratic and least freedom of speech provisions of any Western nation. You are in a country where if I state something that is statistically and factually correct, but that harasses or intimidates a minority group, I am guilty of an offence. And you're in a country with a preferential voting system where if you, Milo, get 100 votes, I get 51, and Senator Leyonhjelm, gets 50. We eliminate the person who comes last. He gives his 50 to me, and I end up with 101 votes and defeat you, even though you had 100 and I had 51.
Yes.
Now, apart from moving overseas, do you have any advice when you operate in a system that has no freedom of speech and no first-past-the-post democratic process? What should we do in a country like this?
Change it. By electing new people. Change it by electing different people. It sounds like you have the worst of all worlds. You have both, ratchets on democracy that prevent you from electing the people you want. I would imagine some of your upstart parties on the sort of populist left and populist right suffer from that particularly. And as far as the free speech provisions go, you have to live. I used to advise people to take it easy, to have an easy life, to fight quietly in private, but it hasn't worked. And I suppose it was slightly hypocritical of me to say so, because that certainly wasn't the approach I've taken. Actually, I think that the left are bullies, and they fold fast when challenged. And I think if you stay laughing, maintain a happy demeanor, and keep dropping the fact bombs, and do it with a laugh, wrap the truth in good jokes, I think you become irresistible. And if you can be compelling and fascinating, if you can capture people's attention, if you can get them to like you while telling the truth, the sky's the limit. The last guy to do that is now sitting in the Oval Office.
So one of the follow-ups to that is this issue of democracy is failing, and people are disenchanted with politicians, and it's all hopeless. So Winston Churchill's quote comes to mind: democracy is still the best form of government of all those we've tried. Do you agree with that, or do you think it can be improved?
Well, democracy hasn't been tried recently. I mean, Greek direct democracy is very different from the systems that we have now, for good reason. I mean, Greek direct democracy was restricted to, like 4 people out of 500, the landowners. Now, I happen to believe that there should be no franchise without participation in the tax system. I think that's fair and reasonable. But the system itself, how you elect your representatives, I don't know. I've always thought the British system was the best, top to bottom. I always the Mother of Parliament seems to get it about right. Or seems to be the fairest. It does have a slightly it hinders upstart parties, but there's a sort of natural inertia that it builds into the system that means that the country can't completely screw itself overnight just because they're angry one day at a headline. But it also seems to be quite a mature and fair system. Democracy is the only form of government that is compatible with human nature, because we as human beings crave freedom, we long to be free, we long to express ourselves, to say, do and be whatever we want, and it is the only system of government that is compatible with what we are.
There's a gentleman in the middle there.
Good day, Milo. Big fan of yours.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, will you ever reconcile your beef with Ben Shapiro? Do you think it's counterproductive to the conservative movement, the two of you at odds with each other?
No, I think that as a broad church, he obviously has slightly different, very different set of beliefs than I do. He's now sort of softening on them because he's realised there's no commercial advantage in being against Trump anymore. He tends to be led by, I think, led by the pocketbook more than me. He finds some of my methods to be gauche and crass, but I think you can decide for yourself whether Ben Shapiro would have sold 13,000 tickets in Australia, and you work out for yourself who's the more effective. I've reached out to him on many previous occasions. He's stopped talking to me now, which is fine by me. But just to add to that, I think it's healthy and necessary to have a broad church on both sides. I don't want everybody to be like me, and I don't want people to only be fans of me. I think the world would be ghastly if we were all Milo Yiannopoulos. But it's healthy and it's nice to have a range of opinions even on your own side, and feuding can be fun.
The gentleman here, yes.
G'day, Milo. I'll just start off by saying thanks for coming here today. I think
Thank you.
We're getting a great deal of benefit out of this.
Use the microphone, please.
As a young conservative, I agree with a lot of things that you do say, but some of the things I don't agree with, so the feminism is cancer, comments such as that.
Keep the microphone up to your mouth, please.
I disagree with it because you think that the analysis that ultimately goes into it is wrong. You disagree with it because it sounds offensive because you don't like the sound of it, or you sort of a third-wave feminist. You think the job's not done yet?
Definitely not one of those, but I think my problem with it is that you do say some really good stuff, and I think there's a great deal we can learn from that and develop on. But I think some people might not take you as seriously as you should be by making some edgy comments such as that. So I just want to ask, why do you make comments like that, and what is the benefit in that?
I mean, I keep getting asked this by good-natured people with their hearts in the right place. People don't take you very seriously. Enough people took me seriously to start hurling things at police officers. My audience takes me very seriously. I think millions of people take me perfectly seriously enough for me. If you want a commentary magazine or a National Review writer, you can go subscribe to The Ben Shapiro Show. If you want somebody who is a little more incendiary, a bit more fun, who likes to throw bombs and upset the left almost as much as the American president does, then come to me. I mean, it's a question of taste, I suppose. I certainly have not found the reach of my message limited, nor its effectiveness blunted by the way that I speak. Quite the opposite.
Malcolm.
Thank you, David. Malcolm Roberts is my name, Milo, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Really appreciate the way you speak up and speak your mind. Perhaps you could discuss the similarities you may see between Muhammad's Quran, which is the basis for the Islamic ideology, and Hitler's Mein Kampf, which is the basis of Nazism. I'm actually being serious, Milo, because both of them espouse authoritarianism, control over people, and both are anti-Semitic.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Hitler's book, which of course everyone should read, because we should read the very, very worst as well as the very, very best that has been thought and written. If we don't know the past, we are doomed to repeat it. And I think trying to get a window into a mind like that is probably a valuable thing to keep us all good, decent, and taking care of one another. It's a very bad book. I don't know really how to answer the question except to say there was obviously quite a lot of communion between a lot of Muslim countries and the Nazi regime, which is quite well known about now, largely centered on their mutual hatred of Jews, absolutely. That's certainly true. I don't know that the books themselves have very much in common. Certainly the certainly the authoritarian instinct, the desire to legislate how other people should live, is intrinsic to Islam. I mean, the word means submission to the will of Allah, and together with the Sunnah and the Hadith, it provides a much more prescriptive code for life than any other religion, and one that hasn't changed in hundreds of years, unlike every other world religion. So it's, in the sense that it claims for itself immutable truths, results in some very ugly things, and seeks to control the behavior of everybody else around it, I guess one book is quite like the other.
Hi, I'm just interested in the type of shampoo that you use. Is it the same as Geert Wilders and Donald Trump?
Well, I just use whatever's in the nearest Ritz-Carlton, which is where I live, because I get home about 2 or 3 days a month, so I don't know. You'll have to ask them what they have in the showers. I never notice. But I am fond of John Frieda Brilliant Brunette Satin Shine Finishing Cream, which if you have yesterday's hair, like I do today, and you want to spruce it up a little bit before a press conference, it works wonders. You'd have to try a lot harder than that, sweetheart.
Hello, Milo. Felicity de Fombelle is my name.
That's a wonderful name.
Thank you. Yeah, I married a French man.
What was it again? Felicity?
De Fombelle.
De Fombelle. Isn't that wonderful? It's great.
It seems to me, particularly in Australia, that social conservatives don't have a voice in the sense that they're not as well mobilised and not as well represented. I'm not exactly sure why that is. I think one of the reasons could be that people who have socially conservative views feel those views, as you often say, are not are not so well accepted, perhaps, and therefore perhaps people feel a bit more intimidated or overwhelmed about proclaiming those views, as opposed to the progressive left, who seem a lot more sophisticated in how they politic and how they put their messages and fight the cause.
Well, you're right about that, and the simple
Just
reason...
your thoughts, thank you.
Yeah, you're right about that. The simple reason is conservatives like to conserve things. They're not constantly on a mission to tear the house down. When you are on a mission to tear the house down, you learn how to do it. You go buy tools, and you learn how to use explosives. And the left has done so very effectively. The left is far better at the dark arts of political warfare than the right ever has been, because it's the left that wants to tear down everything around you and replace it with, well, we're not really sure, communism, Islam, who knows. The institutions of civil society the left seeks to damage or to co-opt, whether it's the media, education, the entertainment industry, politics. These are the engines through which people's hearts and minds are shaped as they grow up. When they start up listening, they start listening to music, they end up going through the education system. Finally, as adults, they start taking interest in politics. The left has been attacking, co-opting, invading, distorting all of these institutions for decades, with the result that conservatives are now at a loss. I mean, they've spent 30 years writing essays about how bad it is instead of actually doing something. You can complain about the language I use. You can complain about my methods. You can you can say that I'm gauche or crass or whatever, and you don't like joke X or remark Y. But at least I'm out there doing something, unlike the previous 2 generations of conservative activists and politicians who have accomplished basically nothing. Whining about the problem while doing nothing to fix it. They haven't started effective think tanks. They haven't opened university departments. I mean, look at the massed ranks of gender studies and all this kind of stuff that is just designed to undermine the foundations of our free societies, all funded by left-wingers, populated by left-wingers. These the universities have now become utterly politically homogenous places. It's at its very worst in America, but I'm sure it's just as bad here. This is a result of capitulation from conservatives. So there is something intrinsic to what we believe that means we're not natural, instinctive agitators. Well, I am, but others may not be. But if you want to get angry about it, really you should be training your sights on the previous 2 generations of conservatives who achieved almost nothing in defense of the values that make these countries great places to live.
Just on a follow-up to that, there might be an argument for suggesting the left is now on the verge of ascendancy. So they're running the institutions, establishing the institutions, manning the institutions, whereas previously it was the conservatives, the right, that did all that. If that's the case, will there be a true role reversal so that the right become the insurgents instead of the left?
Well, that's already happened in America. The Trump presidency is that happening, and the cycle is coming around to you next. 5, 10 years, you'll get it too. This is what, have you ever noticed how comedians used to be so much funnier on TV and now they're sort of not? Well, the reason is that industry, like all other entertainment industries, is determinedly left-wing and refuses to go after its own. Look at Saturday Night Live would not make jokes about Weinstein, and when asked why, the guy said, "Oh, well, he's a New Yorker. We don't go for our own." Trump comes from New York. This is nonsense. Comedians don't want to go for famous left-wingers, so they've completely given up on their historic responsibility to hold truth to power, and so much more importantly, have journalists. So it is inevitable when the control systems intended to check those in power are on the side of those in power, there's going to be some kind of grassroots populist nationalist rebellion. It exists here, it exists in the UK with Brexit, it exists in America. I would expect it to grow, but it, like all fires, will only grow if it's tended to and fed. So tend to it and feed it.
Somebody in the middle there?
Oh, hi there. Michael Koziel from the Sydney Morning Herald. You've obviously done a tremendous job in building up a personal brand. You say the outrageous things, you wear the weird clothes and the dark glasses and all that. I'm wondering...
Did you say weird?
Well, loud.
Something strange about Gucci.
Not at all. But my question is...
Is this Fairfax Media, by the way? Are you do you want...
yeah, you feel free to elaborate on that.
Could we go through some... No, we're not... Well, we'll laugh at you because you're ridiculous, but... No, you know what? Actually, ask your question first, and we'll deal with you in a minute.
Well, my question is, do you genuinely believe...
Huh?
Do you genuinely believe all the things that you claim to, or are you now essentially living out a caricature?
Thank you to the lady in the middle for that nice question. If I didn't believe it, I wouldn't say it. There's no value to me, social, financial, or otherwise, in having the opinions that I have. I would be much wealthier, much happier, and much safer if I were a liberal. But I'm not. I've managed to carve out a career in spite.
Liberal being a lefty.
Oh, excuse me, sorry, yeah. American kind of liberal, not your conservative liberal. I'll leave that with you. No, it'd be much easier for me. I'd have a TV show by now if I were on the left, quite clearly. No, I don't say anything I don't believe. I don't deny for a second that I will say it in an amusing and provocative way because I'm a performer. You should probably go and have a word with Miley Cyrus about why she wears outfits and demands attention. You seem to be very upset about people in public life who have bigger profiles than you, who are able to reach people and shock horror shop at Gucci. Next.
Milo, you've been banned from Twitter. Can you just comment on why you think that was the case? And more broadly, do you have a concern with private sector censorship and how it compares with public sector censorship?
Great question. The reason I was... So the press in America and these social media companies work in tandem with one another. The press will gin up outrage about somebody to justify claims of hate speech or abuse or harassment, most of which means you disagreed with the left-winger. And then the social media companies will then ban you because they've created this groundswell of opposition to you with their friends in the left-wing press, sort of gullible idiots like... Sydney Morning Herald, having created that sort of groundswell of opposition to you on the left, they feel justified, like they can get away with being mean and terminating your contract or closing your account. Now, in my case, it was based on a lie, and they knew it was based on a lie, but they did it anyway. It's a great question because in America, something Orwell did not foresee was that private corporations would actually be the primary engines of censorship in the 21st century, not the government. The government is too slow and too incompetent in the era of social media to effectively censor anyone. You get these heavy-handed tactics from the police which are directed at public figures. In the UK, Katie Hopkins has been arrested I don't even know how many times, for using the wrong word in newspaper columns, or for calling Scottish people sweaty jocks, like anyone cares, like that's worthy of involving 11 police forces, and repatriating her from Australia. She was here. They flew her back to England because she had written sweaty jocks in reference to Scottish people, and some people on the internet got upset about it. That is mind-blowingly stupid. And it's an example of the state running wild. But the state doesn't have the apparatus or the intelligence or the sophistication to police private citizens like it does us. That's left to social media companies who are uniformly and utterly and without exception far left. Not just, we all have friends who vote the wrong way and we don't care too much about, but these are far, far left, activist positions, Black Lives Matter on the wall of Twitter's offices, that kind of thing. And it is private corporations, which Orwell, I don't think, anticipated, which are the primary engines of censorship in America today. That's terrifying because they are beyond the reach of the First Amendment. It creates a problem for conservatives, creates a problem for us because we typically believe that the market will correct over time, but we sometimes have to accept that results in a lot of problems in the short term, So people get censored, people get banned, people get branded harassers and abusers in the short term, and ultimately Twitter will fail, which of course it will. The company is tanking and it has no future at all. But in the meantime, conservatives are robbed of a voice on that platform. I don't think the market is correcting well enough or fast enough in that case. And that is where I step away from my libertarian friends and say that social media companies, like every other powerful rich utility, should be regulated. They should be regulated just like oil companies, because Twitter has a unique purchase on debate in the public square. If you are a journalist or a public figure and you're denied access to your Twitter account, it is, for anyone who isn't me, a serious impediment. It could destroy your career. I've managed to make a virtue out of it, but most people are not so lucky. And to deny a New York Times best-selling author an account because a journalist lied about what they did and you know it was a lie, but you just wanted them off the platform anyway, this is not how a company should be allowed to operate when they are entrusted with so much important communication on which our democracy rests. Journalists decide what stories to cover because of Twitter. They decide how to cover them because of the echo chamber on Twitter. And quite clearly, we're happy to legislate other industries that have huge effects on public finances and on public life in general. I think it's time to regulate Silicon Valley like private utilities.
Hello, Milo. My name's Jason. I just started university this year, and I received 2 scholarships. So I was just wondering, you said that us conservatives should stand up for our beliefs. I'm just wondering what you think, someone like me, that there's big consequences if we stand up for what we believe in, what we should do.
Yeah, I mean, you can hear from that question, and thank you for it, the terror that young conservatives and libertarians are in because 3 generations of conservatives have left them to the wolves in higher education and allowed universities to be taken over by the progressive left and done nothing to defend young people who think differently. 3 generations of conservative politicians have utterly failed to protect young people who think differently. The only kind of diversity that matters, diversity of opinion and thought, has been cast out in favor of meaningless, superficial diversity of skin color and sexuality. And this is a betrayal of you by your parents' and grandparents' generation. It's a problem. I don't know what to tell you. You can speak up and you can get expelled or lose your scholarships and go down fighting and standing up for your principles. That might have a good effect on the rest of society, but it won't necessarily have a good effect on your life. The decision of whether to become an activist and accept the consequences, the personal consequences that go with that, is something that only you can decide. And I'm absolutely not going to push you one direction or the other, except to say that don't take this as advice from me, I'm not telling you to do one thing or another, but without people making those sacrifices, change does not happen.
Gentleman there.
Milo, Jonathan Lee from Channel 10 News here, mate. I'm interested to know
Why did you keep cancelling my interviews?
I don't represent...
I was booked on with so many of your shows and then you cancelled. Why did that happen?
I'm just the journalist, my friend.
Okay.
I'm interested to know, in your opinion, how you see the future 20 years from now. Are we, in your opinion, staring down a kind of Orwellian fate? And you talk, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, you talk about fighting back. Are you advocating for the right to be more aggressive on the street and campaign against similar actions to what we saw last night? And if that's the case, so are we sort of looking at a future where we're going to have far more violence 20 years from now to rectify what you see as the problem?
I see. No, when I talk about aggression, I'm speaking about rhetoric. I don't believe in violence as a solution to problems. That's a left-wing thing. What I do think is that people who come out with baseball bats should be arrested and thrown in jail before they swing them at before they actually do somebody any damage. If they come down clearly with the intent to hurt people, if they're throwing rocks at the police, they should be put in jail. I mean, violent responses to ideas are unacceptable in a civilized society, except we do accept it if they're left-wing. That's not okay. That has to stop. These people have to be classified as what they are. I mean, Antifa in the US, now the FBI is finally admitting that Black Lives Matter and Antifa are domestic terrorist organizations. I mean, these are organizations that use fear, intimidation, and violence for political ends. That's the definition of terrorism. I don't think the right should. I think the right should play fire with. Should fight fire with fire rhetorically, which is what I seek to do. But I don't believe that we should go down to the level of the left and start brawling in the streets. If we did, the war would be over very quickly.
Just as a follow-up to that, if that's
Can you just get the microphone for the room?
If that's not the case, where do you see the future 20 years from now then?
Well, I would...
It's all right. Carry on.
I would like to think that the left has been put back in its box, and by which I mean enough populist, nationalist, pro-free speech conservatives have been installed. Law enforcement has been sufficiently emboldened to remind protesters that they are free to show up and to have their say. I love it when protesters come to my shows. I want everybody to be able to have their say. When people are yelling at each other in the streets, it gets me off. When they start to throw punches, that's when I have a problem, and I don't like it when either side does it. It's always the left that starts it. It's often conservatives who finish it. But I don't like it when either side do it. My preferred future is zero tolerance to violent protests. So if you show up for a protest and you have brass knuckles in your pocket, you should go to jail. If you show up with the clear intent to hurt somebody because they have a different set of political opinions from you, they should go to jail. Just for the night, cool off, that's fine. But don't let these people roam the streets punching and kicking and scratching and pepper spraying people in the face, as happened at UC Berkeley. Because if you allow it, if you turn a blind eye to it, it will grow, and Australia will become just as bad as America. You don't want that.
So just to finish up on that, and to continue that point, in Nazi Germany, we saw the brown shirts, who were originally members of the National Socialist Party, dressed up in uniform, beating up on the communists. Are we in danger of that? Because we have the violent protests from the left attacking you and others who hold similar points of view to you. We are also seeing small groups from the right emerging. Are we in danger of repeating history?
Well, you get a couple of sad rejects on the far right, the white nationalists, the losers, the white supremacist losers, who are minuscule in number, but the press is determined to pretend that they represent some uprising of repressed white nationalism that's just been waiting to burst out. That doesn't exist. There's a couple of thousand maximum total in America. It's irrelevant fringe losers. But on the left, you have vast armies of highly organized and well-funded violent activists. And although Antifa and Black Lives Matter are not branches of the Democrat Party, if you look at how they're funded, they might as well be. So I wouldn't go as far as Nazi brown shirts, but certainly there are inextricable links between, Antifa and Black Lives Matter and the Democrat Party, because they're all funded by the same people.
So,
G'day Milo, James here from SBS News. I just have a question about how you think young members of the alt-right in this country should best pursue their political objectives. And I wondered whether you could reflect on the rise of sort of anti-immigration groups like Reclaim Australia and the United Patriots Front. I think there are analogues in the United States. And do you think people...
know your local groups well.
That's fine.
We were talking about the white supremacist groups.
Right, well...
Sure, so, but do you think...
I don't know your local groups. I'm not
fair
in the
enough.
business of recommending to white supremacists how to achieve their objectives, because I don't want their objectives.
Sure. But as a broader question, do you think that people should participate in anti-immigration groups that aren't white supremacist?
Yeah, of course.
Or would you encourage them to participate in mainstream politics?
Yeah, of course. I mean, most people don't want massive unskilled immigration from the Middle East. Almost nobody does. That is a immigration position that most of the population holds. The left is always going to call you a racist, so you should never shy away from expressing your opinions about different value systems, belief systems, the changing face of your country and all the rest of it, and you should be firm when people try to lead you down the alley of skin color. I guess the advice is don't be scared by allegations of racism, but by the same token, don't be a racist. For me, It's about ideas, values, and systems of government, about whether people are prepared to live according to our ways. If they are, I don't care what they look like. If they're not, they should go home.
So, lady there? Yeah.
Hi, Milo. Judith Island here from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. You've talked earlier in your speech about how women essentially don't have anything left to complain about, and there's been a great victory with feminism. I'm just wondering what you make of the continued high rates of domestic violence and sexual assault around the world. Obviously, Harvey Weinstein's brought that to the fore. We've had a breakfast this morning here at Parliament about domestic violence. 1 in 3 women over 15 years of age in Australia experience physical violence, 1 in 5 sexual violence. What's your response to that? Is that not something still worth fighting for?
Well, those same studies, which are never quoted in full, show that men are just as bad victims of domestic violence as women are, by the numbers. So I don't think that we have a gendered problem. I think that activists from the left-wing press are determined to present it as a gendered problem, determined to drive a wedge between the sexes. Oh, poor women, victimhood narrative. I don't see it that way. I think there is a violence problem, a domestic violence problem, but all of the serious crimes against women have been falling for decades in the West. Rape rates have been collapsing in the West for 40 years. And instead of being proud of it, you've asked your question. Instead of being proud of it, feminists pretend that there is now a rape culture on college campuses where 1 in 3 women is a victim of rape. They're not. To believe that, you would have to believe that college campuses are as dangerous for women as the Congo, where rape is used as a weapon of war. These numbers don't even stand up to common sense scrutiny. They propel these myths about the wage gap, which are based on bogus economics. If you look deeper and further into the numbers, and they're always buried in there somewhere as dishonestly as the pieces are written, you discover that actually, for everything that isn't perfect in our civilization, which comes from the way that men and women are different and interact differently, and sometimes there are differences in the things that one gender has to cope with versus the other, you find actually that men have just as much to deal with as women do. Women are judged relentlessly on their looks, but men are judged relentlessly on how much money they make and how successful they are. Women are... Excuse me, thank you. Rape rates have been collapsing for 30 years. We should be hugely proud of that, but feminists lie about it and claim that we're experiencing some sort of explosion of bad behavior towards women. I think it's probably because they think the rest of us are like their men. They think we're all Wieners, Weinsteins, and Spaceys. Well, libertarian and conservative guys I know are pretty respectful of women. It's your guys who aren't. I understand why Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin have low opinions of men. They think men are like their husbands. It's like I say in my shows, when someone describes themselves as a male feminist, you can start the clock on the rape charge.
So I think we're nearly towards the end here. If there are any last-minute questions, we'll allow them, and I've got one to finish off with, and then we'll wrap it up. Sure. As the bells are going to go for the Senate in a few minutes.
Scurry off, huh?
Yeah, well, for a little while I'll be back, but yeah.
Milo, bearing in mind Brexit, Trump, and the Pauline Hanson One Nation movement, which is rapidly increasing in voters in this country, can you give us some advice on how we as Australians can defeat or win the war against the establishment, against people like the Bill Shortens, the Hillary Clintons, the Malcolm Turnbulls, who seem to be hell-bent on destroying our beautiful country?
I think it's very simple. Stop listening to people who try to tell you how to speak to the voters, how to conduct yourselves, what you should and shouldn't say, what language you should and shouldn't use, what subjects to avoid and go close to, and follow your instincts. When Donald Trump came down that beautiful escalator on that magical day and declared that he was going to build a wall to stop the Mexican rapists coming in, it was crass and all the rest of it. Once you unpicked it, you understood what he was trying to get at. And guess what? The whole of America went crazy. Why? Because for 30, 40 years, they've been told that certain subjects are off limits and shouldn't be discussed. And we've had to tiptoe around and mollycoddle and pander to Muslims in public life, to angry women, and, the Jessica Rose of this world. Well, you don't have to tiptoe around them. You can speak plainly and clearly and frankly to people, and they will reward you at the ballot box for it.
So, where's Max Markson? All right. So I have one more question, and then I'll give it back to you, Max. My question is a little bit like Malcolm's just now. In this room, you've got a lot of friends, a lot of people here. You haven't hit your antagonists inside this room, one or two exceptions. So
we let them in for sport.
Yeah. Spice it up a bit.
No,
yeah.
it's like, what's the point of being beautiful if everybody else is beautiful too? You have to let a couple of people from the Herald in just for fun.
I know that problem. Yeah. So I think it's probably an opportunity. So, given that most of the room is your friends, if they were to leave here with a message that says, "Go out and turn the world into a better place," in terms of libertarian conservative values, which I think would be a useful thing to do. Yes. What exactly would they do? What advice would you give them?
Very straightforward. Stop apologising. Stop allowing the left to set the terms of debate. Stop allowing them to tell you what words are acceptable and not, what you're allowed to laugh at and you're not, what you're allowed to talk about and discuss in Parliament and you're not. And fight fire with fire. The left doesn't fight by your rules. They're not happy to stay, writing erudite essays in magazines and be all dressed up nice and never say the C word. They will fight dirty. They will fight low. They will beat you in the street if they can. We saw it last night. The facts are inescapable. If the left can't persuade, it will turn to violence. It's not suggesting that you should return the favour violently, but certainly in those circumstances where you have power to fight fire with fire in TV studios, in your parliament, and in the pages of your newspapers, take some names and take home some scalps, because these people are dedicated to the destruction of Western civilization. They're dedicated to the eradication of all that makes Australia wonderful. It's a great country. I have loved visiting here. They are dedicated to tearing down many of the things that make it great. Don't let them, because everything is at stake. And getting called mean names from the left, oh, that was sexist, oh, that was racist, well, it hasn't done me any harm, and it won't do you any harm on the proviso that you don't apologise.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Milo Yiannopoulos and Senator David Leyonhjelm. Please thank them again, if you would. Thank you both. And housekeeping. Those who have visitor passes, could you congregate at the back so we can get you escorted into the public areas? And if you want to say I want to say thank you to Penthouse Magazine for bringing Milo to Australia. And if you want a copy signed by Milo Yiannopoulos and/or Senator Leyonhjelm, both their books are on sale outside, as is Mark Latham's. And again, thank you, Milo. I like the jacket. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Wilkinson Publishing, if you publish your books, let's go and sign some books if you'd like to. Thank you.